What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Valero Texas Open. Gonna go over everything you need to know out there for your DFS lineups, also out there for your outright betting card. With first off, what to expect from this golf tournament and what you're looking for out there in your plays. We'll go through some key stats, some comp courses as well, and I'm using to go out there and identify my top prospects. And afterwards, we're gonna go through a few pieces of exposure that I'm getting to, both from the DFS side. We'll talk about my core plays, some of the high exposure guys I'm using up there towards the top, and then some value plays as well, a little bit further down the board that I'm using to save some salary, get some leverage against the rest of the field, and round off my DFS lineups. We're also going to talk about my outright betting card as we go through it as well, because some of my top exposure plays for DFS are also the players that I'm actively looking to go out there and bet this week. So a little bit of a taste of everything out there with our exposure, a lot to go through, so it's not waste any time at all. Go ahead and hop on in. But first off, a look at my modeling and what I'm looking for out there in my player pool. TPC San Antonio is a much different beast than what we had with Memorial Park and the Houston Open. It is a much shorter golf course, especially on the more scoreable holes. And rather than having a complete wide open golf course that you can bomb and gouge it on, you're going to have a lot more missed fairway penalty, both with a 2.5-inch rough as opposed to about an inch. And that's even generous over there for last week. And also a lot more natural areas, which can cause lost balls and penalties. So you're going to see a lot more emphasis on keeping the ball in play. And both from the iron perspective as well, a lot more emphasis from 150 yards and in. In fact, if you take a look at the approach distribution at this golf course, whether it's over there and Bet the Number, any other website that gives you that sort of ability, you're going to see a lot more emphasis from 50 to 125 and also from that 125 to 150 range. So iron play always going to be something that I'm really honing in on for all these PGA Tour events, but this week it is those two proximity buckets in particular, and I'm focusing on just a little bit more. Off the tee, it's a lot more about your positioning around this track than it is about that driving distance, which is the exact opposite of what we had at the Houston Open. Right, last week I wasn't concerned whatsoever with the player's accuracy off the tee. This time around, we're looking at that aspect quite a bit. So whether it's distance from edge of fairway, that's something that's also over there on the Bet the Number model this week that went out there and threw into mine because I thought it was a great idea. Driving accuracy or just regular old balanced shots gained off the tee, that's a good way to try and track your top players. Bogey avoidance comes into play at a trickier track like this, especially with a golf course that has some rough and has some bunkers around the green. Around the green stats are pretty balanced around here. It's not like last week at Memorial Park where almost everything was a shaved fairway area around the green. You have a lot more diversity at this sort of golf course. Your putting, you can look at some overseeded putting stats, also form heading in. And for our three comp courses here, we've got the Shriners, Bermuda Championship, and AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am that all have short positional golf courses off the tee where it emphasizes that iron play from about 150 yards and in. So you have the same kind of ball striking test at all these different sort of golf courses. Agronomy can definitely change. I mean, you've got West Coast POA over there with Pebble. You've got desert golf with the Shriners, Bermuda Championship, of course, Bermuda from tip to toe over there on the islands. But the iron test, the off the tee test, is what we're looking out there from golf course to golf course. So you can see we're going to be looking at a much different player pool than what we had for Houston, where it was about the bomb and gouge strategy, right? Off the tee distance was maybe even the number one thing that we were looking for. It's going to be, like I said, a much different beast this time around. And now for my top pieces of exposure, and this is going to be the first time here in 2025, and I'm advocating for a Jordan Spieth play. And you guys know I'm maybe the biggest fan of anyone out there, so no surprise that you see him out there in my exposure, but maybe a surprise that you see me actually talking about him in a video, because a lot of times, right, I'll put my homer aside and play him and just not really talk about it, but this week I legitimately think he's a good play, partially because of the event history. We know he won this 4 years ago, but even when he doesn't win this event, he's normally making the weekends, and you can see last year, even out of his form, went out there and had a top 10 finish at this course. So this is the kind of track that he feels very comfortable on. Even over this 5-year sample size, or previous to that, I should say, he's had quite a bit of success around here as well. And the shots gained metrics lately have been balanced across the board. He's not carrying himself in any one category. He's positive in all 3 tee to green stats. He's a slight positive over there with the putter as well. And if you go to the last 24 measured rounds, he is slightly negative over there with the approach play, but it's good to see him trending in the right direction, right? Especially going from slightly negative the whole way out there to nearly 0.2 in the positive. That is the kind of swing that we're hoping to see out there. And what we've seen from Jordan is that he's had 2-3 good rounds out there for any good event. He's just got to avoid that 1 or 2 blow-up rounds that have been holding him back from having some success. And if you take a look at the recent form, you'll see that variance creeping in. Right? That top 30 at Valspar was a solid out there for Jordan. 1 round kind of held him back from that top 10. Players Championship made the weekends, but then faltered there over the weekend. weekend. But then you have things like the top 10 at the Cognizant, not really a course that he had any experience at, not particularly a good course fit for him either. He went out there, was able to manage a top 10 finish. Now he's got a field that's pretty in par with what you had at the Cognizant. I would argue a much better course fit. I mean, you've seen it translate to win over here at this golf course, also a top 10 last year around this sort of track, and we're finally getting the old vintage Jordan Spieth. We've seen him start to make some of those 15, 20 footers. He hasn't really had a lot of chip-ins yet, but we know that's coming for a player of his caliber. That's just a part of the Jordan Spieth experience. And then if we can get him to have a good iron week, which he's had one or two here in 2025, but that's definitely been the most inconsistent part of his game. The wrist surgery was supposed to bring more consistency in that part of his game. So I'm waiting to see that from Jordan Spieth before I say he's truly back to what we saw from before. But the rest of his game off the tee looks solid. We know about the short game getting a whole lot better as well. This could be a buy low spot over there at 22.5 to 1. So I know in a lot of other sports books, he's starting to get juiced down a little bit. I believe closer to 20 to 1 at a lot of other spots. But if you can find 22 or even that 22.5 number that I got, I think it's a solid number to go out there and play this weekend. In DFS, he's going to get some ownership. I can't see him being sub 15% really in any sort of contest, but in that 15 to maybe 18% range over there in GPPs is probably where I'm expecting him to come at over there on a Wednesday towards lock. And I think that's decent to get some leverage on, right? Go out there, play him in like 35% of lineups, and you're going to have at least that 2x leverage mark to the field. So is a core play for me, projects out pretty well, top 20 with the recent form ranking. And though the TPC San Antonio course fit maybe isn't ideal on paper, you can see he's actually just close to, just inside the top 150 over there. But he is the sort of player that long-term has played a lot better than what you've seen to start this year. So you got to kind of throw the stats out of it, especially when you have that elite tier course history. That kind of tells us that it might be a better course fit than what we've seen this year. We've also got ourselves Sam Burns here at 55 to 1. So he's $8,600. And I don't think he's going to be highly owned at all. In fact, guys like JT Poston, I think are going to get a lot more ownership than a Sam Burns, a Tom Kim, heck, even a Siwoo Kim or a Tony Finau after that, 15-inch missed tap-in last week, which is terrible. You guys know I played a whole bunch of Tony Finau last week, so that was far from ideal to see that. But Sam Burns, kind of a sleeping giant at this point, and, he's out of form. So the 55 to 1 outright bet is not going to be my biggest piece of exposure this week, but in DFS, where he could go out there, maybe if it's only like a top 10 finish, he can make enough birdies to far outpace that top 10 finish. And even this year, he hasn't had the best start to the year. He's had a few events to this point where he's been top 5 in birdies for the field over the 4 rounds. And if you do that sort of thing on a format like Draftkings, especially in DFS, where it's all about that birdie production, streaks, going out there, getting eagles, mixing that in out there for bonus points, Sam Burns is the player that's capable of racking those up in bunches. And what I like about him is the Bermuda grass putting. You can see over here on this Poetrivless overseed, it's Bermuda overseeded with that surface. He's gaining about a half a stroke per round, and historically, he's really good at Bermuda grass as well. And what do you start to get towards the end of this overseed season is some of that Bermuda grass starting to bud through on these greens. In the last few weeks for Sam Burns, in fact, the last like 3 or 4 starts out there in the PGA Tour, he's gaining close to 2 strokes putting per round. Now, if you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, you'll see what I'm talking about there with Burns. He's been completely carried over there with the flat stick. The iron play has been atrocious over that stretch as well, but mostly coming over a few events where he'd lost like 2, even 3 strokes approach per round out there en route to a few missed cuts. Those were likely due to water balls out there during the Florida swing, which can of course cause a lot of variance out there in that category, but everything else was solid. He also had a few water balls off the tee, or else he would have been well into the positive in that category. The kind of putting that we've seen from Sam Burns, though, is unheard of. He's putting better than anyone in the field on this surface. In general, right, we know he's really good over here on this time of year. He's won at Valspar Championship, same sort of greens that you have for this kind of week. What you're betting on here at 55 to 1 on Sam Burns is for him to click over there with that ball striking and to finally go out there and gain strokes off the tee on our approach. Because even if it's not anything drastic there, let's say he gains like 4 strokes to the field over there with the ball striking this week, he's capable of gaining 6 to 10 strokes putting when he's putting as well as what he is right now. In fact, over an entire event sample size, he's gaining 5, maybe even 6 strokes putting per event at this point. So that's why if he can just find anything, and I mean anything over there with the ball striking stats, that's a top 5, top 10 finish right there. So that's why I love him for DFS. I think he's got a much wider range of outcomes, or a much better chance of getting to the top end of this range of outcomes if he can go out there and just be okay with the ball striking, get that top 5, top 10. But God forbid if he snaps out of it and starts playing like the Sam Burns that we know, goes out there, is hitting, some fairways off the tee, he can lay up off the tee at this sort of golf course as well with all that length with the 3-wood. He can try and just be a little bit more positional in some of those shorter par 4s. If he does that, lets the putter be the star this week, I really like him for all these different formats. So that's why I bet him for the outright, while I'll be playing him out there in some DFS lineups as well. Next up, we got Maverick McNealy, who I bet at 66-1. So that was at 60-1. I did boost it by 10% over there on Hard Rock Bet. He's a core play for me that I think is going completely under the radar. Kind of like Sam Burns, the form is a little bit sub-ideal, especially over the last 12 measured rounds. Mav McNealy has started to take a step back. The around the green surprisingly has been his biggest bugaboo. He's usually well into the positive in that category. So I think this could be just a little bit of a short, small sample size aberration. But off the tee is also left a little bit to be desired. But if you go back to the last 24 measured rounds, which of course he has a win during that stretch, he's gaining close to a half a stroke per round on approach. He's gaining with the putter, and sure, the off the tee play is still leaving a little bit to be desired, but he plays better at these off the tee courses where you don't have to hit driver all day. The shorter, more positional courses where 3-wood gets the job done. And because he's added a lot of length to his game over the last year or so, he's the kind of player that, like a Sam Burns, doesn't have to hit driver around this golf course. I mean, heck, even on some of like the 440, 450 yard par 4s, if he hits a 3-wood on those sort of holes, he's going to have at most like an 8-iron into those sort of greens. If it's into the wind, maybe it's like a 7-iron that he's hitting into those sort of holes. He's the sort of player that you've seen at big boy tournaments against signature fields go out there and contend, nearly win. Heck, even win this last year over the RSM Classic at better fields than what you're going to get this week. He's another player that's really good on those overseeded greens, and long term, right, the more you zoom out there on Mav McNealy, you see he's a top 20 course fit over here at TPC San Antonio. So he doesn't have the most course history around here, not elite tier course history by any means. You can see he has that T58, also that T35 finish. Also, just to check on Sam Burns, has not played here that often, especially over the last 3 years, but did have that top 25 finish there 5 years ago. So, elite tier course history, right, that's reserved for guys like a Jordan Spieth that we were taking up there towards the top. These are just two high upside players that we've seen win out there on the PGA Tour before, that if they can just find a little bit of something with their ball striking for Burns, it's got to be the iron play. Cannot lose 1.5 strokes iron play per round. That is horrendous, well below his expectations. Mav needs to find a way to gain like 2 strokes off the tee this week, which he's shown us that he is more than capable of pulling off. Just show it to me, Mav. Go out there, do that sort of thing, and you could be cooking up a top 5, a top 10. So that's what I'm looking at with my core plays up top. I don't think Mav is going to be overly chalky either. Guys like Bud Cauley, I think it's going to be the chalk here of the lower end of that 8K range. I think even a Jacob Bridgman, who I rank out very well this week. In fact, those 2 players are 1 or 2 in my modeling this week, and I think that the form is there. I understand why they're getting that sort of steam, but long term, I know my modeling is there. I trust it, all of that sort of stuff. It's going to be hard not to want to play Bud Cauley or Bridgman as long as their ownership stays in check. But long-term, Mav McNealy's the better player, right? You can't forget that when you're going out here and playing PGA DFS, because if Mav is going to be lower owned than those other 2 players, and I would argue that he's by far the better play of the bunch to go out there and take the field on. So that's why he's my core play for me this week. Same thing with guys like a Sam Burns. Right? If he's going to be lower owned than Siwoo Kim, JT Poston, I've got Burns as by far the best long-term player out of those 3. And if he's going to be the lowest owned out of them, that's why I think they're even better plays out there from the DFS format. And, from the outright betting perspective, they're maybe not my favorite plays that I've taken here in 2025, but I will take long shots at 50-1 or longer on high upside proven winners on the PGA Tour. And at 55-1, 66-1 over there with Mav McNealy, that is exactly what we're getting. Before we talk about our value plays, which will be 3 more outright bets that I've added to the card, as well as a few salary savers that you can use in your lineups, I do want to remind you that you can find these sheets over there on my Patreon page. If you want to download these with all my projections, all my modeling for every single player that is teeing it up for these tour events, join the Patreon page down below. There's a link in the description to go out there and join that. For just $15 a month, you can get access to all these main slate sheets that you see in my videos every single week, but also the showdown sheets that you see for rounds 2 through 4 that I'm posting. So showdown rounds 2 through 4, that's Friday through Sunday. I do the same sort of thing that you see here, and it's not like you're getting charged $50 to $200 a month like other websites out there are charging you for golf. It's only $15, right? So very affordable for what I go out there and offer, which, by the way, are the most accurate ownership projections that you have in the entire industry. If you've seen my X post on that. You know all about all the other slapdick companies out there that aren't doing a good job in that category. And it's not even like you have to go out there and tail my player pool. I do post that over there for my Patreon members to go out there and have for perspective. It's more so the research tools that are going out there and expediting your process that a lot of people join for. And then the perspective, right? It's good to know who a pro DFS player is going out there and using for any given week, how large their player pool is, the sort of things they're looking for in their players as well. So it's not even just to go out there, kind of have an idea of a few other guys to maybe add to your player pool based on who I'm using, but it's also all of that other added stuff as well. So if that sounds like something you guys want to go out there and join, again, it's not an arm and a leg to go out there and do so as well. It also helps support the channel out there in the process. So check it out if you guys haven't already. Again, link in the description of the video. But next up, we got our value plays, and I'm super stoked about these players because I think that they have a decent shot to go out there and win. In fact, they model out better than some of the other guys that we just talked about, and you were getting some real tasty odds when it comes to the outright bets. So let's start with Ben Griffin here at $7,900, who, believe it or not, might actually be higher owned than a Maverick, who, it's just blasphemous. Long-term Mav is such a better player, but recently Ben Griffin's been balling out, and I think he's really setting up well for this sort of event. So I bet him at 60-1, and even if he is going to be like 12% owned to GPPs, that's not the end of the world. I think there'll be guys in this range that are even higher owned than what you have there with the Ben Griffin, right? Namely guys like a Collie Bridgman that are a little bit more expensive, maybe even your Jake Knapps of the world, Gary Woodland after that Sunday performance, which by the way, just brings a smile to my face. He's just such a good guy. Great to see him going out there and having that sort of success. But Ben Griffin, hopefully those kind of names take away some of that attention because he sets up perfectly for this sort of track, right? Unlike Maverick and, Burns that have a little bit of issues out there with the shots gained metrics, guys like Ben Griffin have been a lot more consistent. Over the last 12 measured rounds, he's pretty close to neutral in all four categories. Over the last 24 measured rounds, he's also been rather consistent. He's been a little bit better with the iron play, the more and more we zoom out. And in general, gaining close to a stroke per round with the shots gained. So in general, he's one of the best form players of anyone that we have in this range. Of course, Collie Bridgman, the best, right? That's why they're getting the most attention. But these guys that are just a step back, right? About a half a stroke worse per round lately, just remember that this is how they're playing lately, right? This isn't their long-term baseline. The guys that are priced in this portion of the board are all pretty much the same sort of players long-term. So just because he's got slightly better form than somebody like Ben Griffin lately, and I could say Bud Colley versus Ben Griffin is maybe the comparison that we're doing right here, does not mean that he should be double the ownership, right, as a Ben Griffin. So that's why I think he's such a fantastic play out there in your DFS lineups. And at 60-1, I guess the one argument against him is that he's played so much golf over the last few months, but he's used to it at this point, right? He hasn't really fallen off with the form. He's been rather consistent out there on the PGA Tour. Number 11 from the long-term fit. So like I said, the more and more you zoom out on him, the better it looks out there with the shots gained. And he putts well over here on this overseeded surface as well. Next up, we've got ourselves a Ryan Gerard here at $7,600, and he's going to be chalk. And this is maybe the one piece of chalk that I'm willing to get to because he's cheaper than some of the other guys. Like an 8K and 9K piece of chalk, that's a player that's playing well above his baseline, then no thank you, right? I don't want it. But at $7,600, this opens up a lot of flexibility, right? Up towards the top end of the board. And I think that Ryan Gerard could probably be $8,500, and I don't think a lot of people would bat an eye at it. He's top 10 in my total mono ranking. He's top 20 when it comes to the recent form. You can see he loves putting on this overseeded surface, and the one thing that held him back last week from potentially winning that golf tournament, getting up there into the top 3, was his putting. He just could not make anything for the life of him, and it wasn't for trying because he was setting up look after look out there over the last 3 rounds. But if you go to the last 12 round sample size, you'll see the iron play has been unbelievable, gaining about 1.2 strokes per round. He's been very accurate off the tee as well. He was top 20 in the field last week when it came to driving accuracy, and the putter has been solid. Actually, last week was a little bit of an aberration with him struggling over the last 2 rounds, but in general has been getting a lot of putts to drop, so I would expect that to rebound sooner rather than later. And it isn't even just the last 12 round sample size. If you take a look at the last 24 round sample size, he's still gaining off the tee. In fact, he's even better over there with the approach play. This has been all of 2025 that Ryan Gerard's been one of, if not the best tee to green players that we have on all the PGA Tour. And I saw somebody tweet something out that that, if you just look at raw shots gained for this year, that he was number one in the entire world when it comes to shots gained tee to green. So Ryan Gerard might actually be worthy of being chalked down here because he's probably $1,000 at least too cheap from where he should be. So at 75 to 1, I went out there and took him for an outright. And sure, he might be close to 10% owned this week. I kind of know that ahead of time. Even on a Monday, I know that out there with the Ryan Gerard, I've got five other spots in my lineup to go out there and get different. It's why I really like players like a Sam Burns to get a little different over there in the 8K range, because if I'm going to sneak in a piece of chalk down here in the 7Ks, which 6-7K range is typically where I'm getting all my leverage out there in my lineups, well, I better be compensating for it somewhere elsewhere. And, that place for me is going to have to be with one of my guys up top. So that's why Sam Burns, if he's going to be closer to 10-12%, could be really useful for that. And heck, even McNealy, if we can get him at sub 15%, maybe even closer to that 10 to 12% like you have there with the Sam Burns, that would be a great pivot off of guys like a Bud Colley or a Jacob Bridgman. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with these two. They grade out very well. Like I said, 1 and 2 in my modeling myself. But if they are in my player pool, there's a chance that they creep one or maybe even both of them, right? Creep themselves in out there into my player pool, right? I'm not going to be using that sort of play very likely with a Ryan Gerard, right? Because if I go with both of those pieces of chalk, then I'm kind of cornering myself when it comes to the ownership. So just remember with these sort of videos where I talk about plays out there from time to time, the far more important process when you're going out there and building for yourself is the actual game theory in your own process, right? Going out there, it's not who you go out there and play, right? It's how you play them out there in your lineups. You can have some chalky pieces out there in your 150 max pool if you're pull of 30 to 40 players, if you're entering 150 lineups, but don't be using 3 or 4 of them out there together. So whether you're using an optimizer and setting a roll to go out there and avoid those sort of interactions, or going out there and hand building yourself and just making sure that you have enough leverage out there in your lineups, that aspect of DFS is very important to consider, especially if you're going to have guys like this in your player pool, right? It's not such an issue if you have all pivots across the board, right? If you're just playing the game theory game when it goes to actually building your player pool, that's a real easy way to go out there and build. You can just hit optimize, take your top projected plays, and upload over there to Draftkings. It does make your life a little bit easier, but it is to say that it's not impossible, though, to go out there and play these guys like Ryan Gerard. And the last play we're going to go through here is going to be Thorbjorn Olesen at $7,200. And this is the play that we're getting a little bit frisky with. He is, not in amazing form, but he's not in terrible form either by any means out there. He's 100 to 1. Now, on other books like DraftKings, FanDuel, he's closer to 80 to 90 to 1. Heck, even 75 to 1 out there in a few books. So people seem to like the Thunder Bear out there in their lineups. He did have a top 15 finish here last year, so he doesn't have a massive sample size of form at this golf course, but last year in this one start over the last 5, he does have that top 15 finish, and the shots gained metrics are finally starting to come around on him. And on the DP World Tour towards the end of last year, beginning of the PGA Tour season last year, he kind of struggled. He was spinning his wheels, missing some cuts out there. Then he went back to the DP World Tour, and he was like the best player on that tour. It was top 5, top 10 finishing almost every single week. To start this year in the PGA Tour, it got back to struggling again, which is, it's tough to see. Sure, it is a step up in terms of talent level, but these elite tier DP World Tour guys usually have a lot of success over here in the PGA Tour as well. Now lately though, last 12 round sample size, we're starting to see the glimmer of hope for Olesen, because when he plays really good golf, he goes on runs for a month or even 2-month sample sizes. And if I could try and be early the Thorbjorn, because I don't think he's going to be super chalky this week, or we're still getting him at triple digits when it comes to that outright betting number, I'll take it there at $7,200, especially when it's saving us salary over there in our lineups. And I think that at most, he's probably about 5% ownership this week. I do think that when you're a top 40 ranking when it comes to form, right, you're gaining about 1/3 of a stroke per round in that category, that you're not going to be completely overlooked, especially because these 7K range guys get a lot of ownership in general, right, just because they're down there in that 7K range. But I don't think he's going to be in that 7 to 10% range like you might have with players like a Ryan Gerard. So like I was mentioning before, it's not who you play, it's how you play them. You have somebody like an Olesen that you can use for leverage in your lineups. It helps offset some of that chalk towards the top. So for example, right, I know that Jordan Spieth is probably going to have some ownership. Guys like a Ben Griffin, right, he might even be like about 15% ownership out there in GPPs. It's the guys like Olesen down here in that 6K, even lower end of the 7K range like we have right here, that you got to use to get different to the rest of the field on. So that game theory, right, making sure that you have that leverage in lineups is key. And it's players like Olesen that are showing us a few of the signs out there with the shots gained metrics that I'll be using out there for those purposes. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the DFS and betting preview. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include our Wednesday live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Go through all your questions down there in the chat. We'll go through a little bit of a weather report, how that'll impact out there for rounds 1 and 2. We'll go through some ownership, some game theory notes out there before lock, contest selection, also some lineup construction over there on Draftkings to put a bow and to get you ready for all of your exposure. If you guys are a fan of underdog and prize picks props, we're also going to touch on that over there on the Wednesday live stream when we get prop boards to go through and maybe try and find some value over there from that perspective. And like I said, any questions that you want to use to fill in the gaps, we'll go ahead and go over those as well. So make sure you subscribe so you guys don't miss that over there on Wednesday, and also comment down below what you've got as the winning winner for this week. Winning scores over there for the course preview. Your winner for this week for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. It'll be on a first come first serve basis. They have to be at least, we'll say 25 to 1 to go out there and win for this week. So just do a little double check over there in the books, right? Make sure you're taking somebody that isn't one of those top favorites up there towards the top. And if you get that winner, you will win a free month access to those Patreon projections, which of course, as I said before, is where you can find all my modeling, all the exposure that I'm getting to for any given week. Those research sheets to go out there and expedite your research process and give you all the tools, all the ammo that you need to go out there and have yourself a smash week. So to earn that for free, you don't even have to go out there and pay and join the Patreon page. Of course, that's the easiest way to get access to all of those projections, but a chance to earn that for free, just give me your winner, as I said before. But best of luck, whether it's with the giveaway or with all of your exposure this week. I hope to see your names out there towards the top of some of those GPPs. Also with any of your outright bets over there on the prop betting side as well. Let's make this one a little start of momentum heading into major season, because they got Augusta National, the Masters on our radar for the next week. I want to make sure we've got a hot hand heading into that season. So looking forward to it. Best of luck, as I mentioned before, and I'll see you guys over there for that Wednesday live stream.